good morning, and welcome to the Africa Weekly Talk. Today's subject on the docket is, will history judge the legacy of the late Queen Elizabeth II favorably or unfavorably, especially among former colonies as well as African countries? Now, first of all, let me send my condolences to the people of Great Britain, and also may her soul rest in peace. There's been a buzz on social media this past week since the passing of the late Queen Elizabeth II. And this has drew some rebuke from some fellow Europeans as well as Americans and even some Africans. But there's some that also talked about the reality, the legacy of the monarchy that goes back maybe thousands of years, especially when you talk about slavery and colonization and all of that. And there was a rally held by Julius Malema in South Africa a couple of days ago, where he really had some unpleasant words about the past with regards to the British involvement in colonization, especially in South Africa and Africa, as well as some issues regards to how the blacks in South Africa were treated during apartheid, while the monarch was still pretty much not ready to condemn the regime of the apartheid. Then also came people from the Caribbean, an interview that I saw with regards to Muta Baruka. Muta Baruka talking about a 12-day mourning period that has been established by the Jamaican government in mourning of the passing of the Queen. And he was vehemently against it. Apparently, this was even a video posted by Oliver Samuels, a comedian from the Caribbean, from Jamaica, mocking the Jamaican government for putting in place a 12-day mourning period. Because he was saying that, why would Jamaica honor a person who basically colonized them, and was involved in other stuff that pretty much wasn't good for the people of Jamaica. So basically, they don't understand and they don't agree why there should be a 12-day mourning period. Then there is this Twitter war or battle between Uju'S and Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon. What pretty much happened was Uju'S tweeted some very unpleasant death wish for the Queen. And Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, responded with a rebuke of Uju'S. So this created a Twitter war with some people supporting Uju'S, as well as some people also supporting Jeff Bezos with regards to what she has said about the Queen. But there's one thing that really at the bottom of all of this thing goes to talk about the Queen that goes beyond even before her ascension onto the throne. Most of the argument that are being made right now is about colonization and slavery, the role of the monarchy. But I'm not going to hold that against the Queen. Because, if you talk about slavery and all that stuff, it goes way beyond, way before even she was born. And even before her father was born. Even though some of the people who were the leaders of England at that time, the monarchy, were the ones involved in this slave trade and all that stuff. But I'm not going to hold the Queen responsible for something that she wasn't even born at the time when it took place. But what I would say is this. I also understand the position taken by these people in regards to the role of the monarchy. Because at the end of the day, she ascended onto the throne of the monarchy. So even though she might not have directly been involved in some of the past things done by the monarchy against Africans and other people of the world, she is still the one who was on the throne. So she has some blame. Okay, she has some responsibilities as well, especially especially taking into consideration that she came onto the throne when she was like, what, 25 years old. 25 years old in 1953. The throne and the monarchy, in terms of the structures of that monarchy, it's already been set in stone. I mean, the monarchy structure has already been set in stone going back thousands of years, about thousands of years. So there's no way she comes in and she can enact any changes with regards to certain things. There are some things she will just have to live by because it's part of the system. The institution, as it is, has established that going back thousands of years. So she has to just follow the process that is already been put in place. Now, 20 years after being on the throne, it's a different story. And if you look at the history of African independence, mainly the British colonies, most British colonies in Africa outside of Egypt, which became independent before she ascended onto the throne. But you talk about Ghana became independent in 1957, and right after Ghana, you had other African countries like Nigeria, Sierra Leone, and other West Africa in particular countries that became also got their independence from the England, while she was barely maybe 10 years on the throne. I don't know the role she played in that, because to me, like I said, there were things that forced them to enact those changes, which ended up granting independence to most African countries. Maybe she might have contributed to it, I don't know. So when I hear people talk about her role, talk about some things that she did and blaming her, especially when they blaming her for like issues with regards to colonization and slavery and all that stuff, you can blame the monarchy, because with the monarchy, yes, I will hold the monarchy responsible for some of the things they did, just as well as holding some of the things that the African leaders themselves did to enable that to take place. But if you talk about, let's say, the First Virginia Trading Company and the Plymouth Trading Company, First Virginia Trading Company was established by King James I. And this was the company that was founded by King James I, and eventually they sold, made it public, and some people bought stocks in it. That was basically to exploit other parts of the world and contributed in what? In the slave trade. So there's no way you can take a monarchy out of that involvement when it comes to the slave trading, because they were particularly involved in the slave trading business at the time, because they funded some of these merchant ships that went to bring slaves from Africa to the New World, America. So if you had King James commissioning the First Virginia Trading Company in search of slaves, and funding some of these slave ships, then the monarchy is part of it. And she ascended onto the monarchy. So at the end of the day, when you talk about the monarch itself, yes, the monarch played a key role in colonization. I mean, not even a key role. They were the main role in colonization. Because remember, Africa was officially colonized in 1884 after the Berlin Conference. So anything from 1844 all the way to the independence of most African countries from in the mid-1940s all the way to the 60s and 80s by Zimbabwe, she can be held she has some responsibility to that. But anything prior to that is very difficult to pin that on her. The only responsibility that I will pin on her is especially when she ascended onto the throne from 1953, and let's say maybe 20 years after that, But let's also not forget, especially when we are calling for the dissolution of the Commonwealth. I mean, the Commonwealth was founded, I think, in 1943, 1946 by the British, even before most African countries became independent from the British. So it was founded basically to hold their colonies together, because eventually they knew they have to give up their colonies. So when they founded the Commonwealth, and when we became independent, mainly the African countries and the British colonies, we had a choice of being part of the Commonwealth or not being part of the Commonwealth. But if you look at our history also, going back around our independence from our colonizers, most of our first leaders who fought for our independence were overthrown within a very short span of time in Africa. And when those leaders were overthrown, the puppet governments that came in aligned with the colonial masters, because most of the coups that were against African countries were orchestrated by our former colonial masters and the CIA of the USA, of the United States of America. I mean, these are documented facts, okay, by the CIA about some of the military coups that they were involved in other parts of the world and Africa in particular. So this is not something that is hidden. It's open now. So if you look at that, and then now you hear people calling for the dissolution of the Commonwealth, I beg to ask this question. Why do we have to hold Queen Elizabeth II accountable for some of the things that pretty much happened when she wasn't even on the throne? I beg to differ on that one. I don't think she has to be held accountable for anything or any of that stuff. She might be held accountable for being on the throne in terms of the monarch. When you talk about the monarch, but her personally, I'll cut her some slack when it comes to certain things with regards to that. Because her personally, she ascended onto the throne in 1953, and therefore I'm not going to hold her responsible prior to 1953. Anything that was done by her father and grandfathers and whatever. But I also hold responsible the African leaders at the time. Because now you hear people, talking about why we have to ask for reparations and also dissolve the Commonwealth and all of that. I get all of that. I understand it. And I understand the passion over that stuff. Yes, I agree with most of the sentiments around Africa today about the Commonwealth and the imprints of colonization in Africa. I already spoken about this, and I talked about this about a month ago, and even talk about the involvement of the Catholic Church also in slave trade, as well as the monarchs in Europe around and the world around that time. So if you look at the blame game, I don't expect African countries, and I will say emphatically that we don't have to blame Queen Elizabeth because of issues like slave trade and colonization and all that stuff. Yes, she might have played some role in colonization, because when she came in, most African countries were still under colonization. But at the end of the day also, when we became independent, we had choices to make. We had choices of either to stay within the Commonwealth organization or to break away from the Commonwealth organization, or break away entirely from our colonial masters. But we decided to stay. And whilst we stayed, we had these military coups that overthrew our leaders who had been elected by our people through democratic process. And now with these military coups coming in, we started having these puppet governments who couldn't break away from our colonial masters because they needed protection militarily from our colonial masters to stay in power. And because of their selfish ideas and selfish motives, they will never break away from our colonial masters. So that is what pretty much contributed to where we are today. But by the same token also, if you look at most African countries, even today, as I'm speaking, you look at the Francophone countries, they still have alliances with England, with the French. They still have alliances with the French, sending billions of dollars to France every year. And then they go back to France to borrow that money and pay higher interest to the French government. And meanwhile, the French people call them, the African colonists, as poor people. Meanwhile, they are the ones financing. They are the ones financing the government of France. So, I mean, this is the question we have to be asking ourselves. I get it. I get the emotions going on right now with the calling of reparation and all that stuff. I get it. But we have to ask ourselves these questions. Why are we still contributing to our colonial masters' economies? Especially with these Francophone countries, sending billions of dollars of money from their poor, so-called poor African countries to the wealthy France, and they go back to France to borrow this same money and they pay interest to help build the French economy. I mean, this is ridiculous. So when you hear people calling for the dissolution of the Commonwealth and all that stuff, I get that. But the question is, why are our leaders still doing this? Other than because of the corrupt system we have in our countries, as well as because they want to look good in the eyes of the European. Okay? So I mean, let's be truthful to ourselves when we talk about getting rid of certain things like the Commonwealth and all that stuff. Me personally, I don't even know what the Commonwealth pretty much does for Africa today. To me, the Commonwealth is not going to build your countries today. Let's be real. Africa's way to growth and development economically is going to be based on Commonwealth and Francophone stuff. It's going to be based on private foreign investments. That is the key to Africa's growth and development, period. There's nothing ifs and buts about that. And also talking about even the idea of being part of the Commonwealth. America was colonized by England. America was a British colony. Okay? And then they fought the independence war against the British and got their independence from England. But America never joined the Commonwealth. America didn't join the Commonwealth because America wasn't going to go join a Commonwealth and listening to the British about what to do. Heck no, it wasn't going to happen. I mean, even if you're a president of America back then or a member of Congress or talking about anything like that, look, they might have charged you with treason in America. So we had choices to make. So if we chose not to get out of it and stayed in it because of our service leaders' interests to get this protection from these former colonial masters, then that is why we are here today. So let's reevaluate whether it is worth it for us to be part of this Commonwealth and Francophone and all that stuff. And it's up to the leaders of Africa to present it to their people, to make a case to their people, does it hurt to be part of it? If it doesn't hurt, then hey, we've been part of it for how many years now? Let it stay. But if there's no value to it, then we have to make an honest decision whether we have to join it. If the only argument, because mainly the argument I hear from people is about breaking away from our colonial masters. That is pretty much the argument when it comes to people talking about the dissolution of the Commonwealth. It's mainly about breaking away from our colonial masters. But if that is what the argument is, just for the mere sake of breaking away from our colonial masters, then fine, I get that argument. But are we still going to be trading with our colonial masters? Are we still going to have our colonial masters' businesses that were established over 100 years still operating our systems? Are we still going to have all these gold mines that were controlled and royalties passed on to our colonial masters companies still operating and still taking money, royalties that were established over 100 and something years ago when we were still under colonization? Some of these companies are still operating under those royalties. Those are the areas that I think we have to look at. Those are the areas we have to break away from. Break away from the areas where we let these colonial masters control us from 200 and something years ago, and we still have these same royalties that they are using to create good investments for their countries and their companies. That is the area I think we have to look at, But I'm not for getting out of the Commonwealth. If getting out of the Commonwealth is going to give us something, so be it. By the end of the day, I don't know what the Commonwealth even does for Africans. Okay, I don't even know what it does. If there are some good things to it, okay, let's use it. But if not, every country has to make their own decision. But the Francophone countries are the ones who have to look at their systems, their countries' alliances with France. And they have to look at it because you cannot be sending billions of dollars from your various African countries to France and then go back to them and borrow from them and pay them interest to service their countries, whilst they still call you a poor country. I mean, that has to stop. And that is where we have to look at. That is where I think we should direct our energy towards our governments to make sure those changes take place. Because those are the key changes that is going to help bring economic development to Africa. So if I did this video today, let me say again, may the Queen of England so rest in peace. But I'm not going to blame her for some of the things that were done prior to her ascension onto the throne. But maybe she have some things that we can talk about, debate about it in terms of her role when she ascended onto the throne, what she could have done to change certain things, But at the end of the day, this is where we are. If we want to break away from our colonial masters, let's look at the key areas that will help develop our economies, help develop our systems. And let's look at that and deal with that. So if it's Sunday, it's the Africa Weekly Talk. God bless you guys, and peace and love. Have a blessed day.